Democrats right now are considering asking President Joe Biden for broad pardons before he leaves office. Now, this comes after Biden's recent broad pardon of his son Hunter for all possible crimes, everything that could have possibly happened going back more than a decade. And in other news, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, well, he's now suggesting the sanctuary status of New York City may soon come to an end. It seems that he's shifting now. New York City may be working with the incoming Trump administration on carrying out mass deportations of illegal immigrants. New York has switched. And also, the Chinese Communist Party is accelerating a trade war with the United States. China announced that it is banning exports to the United States of some metals and rare minerals, which we need for things like semiconductors, ammunition, folks, and a whole bunch of other things. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about this trade war accelerating. What do you think the CCP is up to with this? Let me know. And let's dive into today's stories. Now, first of all, Democrats right now, they're considering making a call for broad pardons before President Joe Biden leaves office. It's important to note they're considering it because not everybody's on board. There's some technicalities that need to be discussed. Now, briefly though, this follows Biden's recent pardon of his son Hunter Biden for all possible crimes going back more than a decade. This is not just about the tax charges or the gun charge. This is everything. And with the incoming Trump administration promising large-scale criminal investigations on the other side, many are now wondering whether similar pardons that Hunter Biden got should be granted to everybody who could possibly face investigations. Now look, there are still debates over whether this could actually be useful or whether this could actually cause more harm than good to the parties of interest, let's say. Now, first of all, on the potential pardons, let me show you this. Washington Examiner said that Senate Democrats are weighing whether President Joe Biden should use his final moments of power to issue preemptive pardons to shield those who could receive political retribution from President-elect Donald Trump. And it's even before Biden issued a pardon for his son Hunter Biden, who was criminally convicted this year on tax and gun charges on Sunday, it says, Senator Ed Markey, he's a Democrat, publicly floated the idea that the president, Joe Biden, should consider, quote, preemptive pardons, similar to what Hunter Biden got, to people Trump has threatened to prosecute. But not everybody's on board with this. Senator Ron Wyden, another Democrat, said that he'd need more time to think about whether Biden should pursue preemptive pardons, but he did emphasize that he understood why the president recently worked to shield his son. But it says also, a majority of Senate Democrats are not on board with Markey's perspective of preemptive pardons. Senator Tim Kaine, another Democrat, said the push is something he'd advise Biden, quote, not to do. Senator Peter Welch said that he'd instead urge Trump to vow that he will not go after his political opponents before taking office. This is important. Why would it be that the majority of Democrats, although some want it, the majority of them do not want these pardons? Now, we'll go into this, but first of all, Biden himself has not yet shown signs that he's going to grant additional pardons. It's being talked about pretty broadly, but with around 6 weeks left in office, time is kind of running out for it. If he's going to do it, he has to do it soon. The issue of pardons, though, is particularly big. Many in the Biden administration and throughout the system could potentially face investigations under the incoming Trump administration. Trump saying he's going to do it. Nominees like FBI Director Kash Patel, they've previously declared their intent to go after the deep state. Many of them have named a large number of public officials and others who are more part of the kind of bureaucratic system like middle management. They're going to be going after them. Not only that, but Trump in some public videos on his campaign was even laying out the possibility of opening up doctors and others who've been engaged, for example, in the trans surgeries, to possible criminal charges and to possible lawsuits from patients. He's talking about criminal charges potentially against a lot of the media. And the individuals who are facing this, many of them are asking for pardons. Now, the challenge for Biden and for the Democrats is that if they get pardons, if he actually gives out these pardons, This could end up painting the entire administration with an image of corruption if he does it too broadly. If he does it for a few people, that's one thing. If he does it for like the entire establishment, that's another thing. It could make them look bad. It could damage their image. The pardons themselves could actually taint the legacy of the administration if done too broadly, and that's part of the concern. Now, the other side, though, it can also be argued that Trump's previous administration, they also faced large-scale criminal investigations, charges. Think about all the people in the first Trump administration who later faced criminal investigations, charges. Some even went to prison, right? The damaged reputation, it is on one side of the aisle. It's not on the other side, at least in terms of alleged crimes. And even a lot of people who were accused ended up not really facing much in terms of actual punishment. Meaning that some people may calculate and say, well, they talk big, they say they're going to put us in prison. It might not happen in the end. There might be investigations, but in the end it might be just a little slap on the wrist. We don't really know. But it's also important to note something else. Preemptive pardons will not necessarily prevent investigations. In fact, it may make investigations easier. And this is the other side of it. If a person is pardoned, this is one of the big arguments right now. If you get pardoned, you may not be able to plead the fifth if you get called in to testify. This means that information may be forced into the public. Investigations will be easier to carry out. Anybody who gets a pardon could be called in to testify, and they can't say, Your Honor, I plead the fifth. I don't want to say anything that will incriminate myself, because there's no longer a risk of them incriminating themselves. They will be forced to testify. That's a danger when it comes to this for everybody else who may have been involved. They get pardons, but what about everybody else connected to them, right? Now, any legal protections from any potentially exposed crimes could then paint the entire party and every single person who was pardoned ahead of time in context of any scandal that gets uncovered through that process. And that's very dangerous for them. They may not want to risk that. They may want to say, okay, this was a corrupt individual. They were acting on their own. They had nothing to do with the entire establishment. But if you link all of them with pardons, then it looks like he did something wrong. The effect of pardons can actually be more broadly damaging than just the risk of a few individuals facing criminal charges. That's the big difference. Now look, we actually see this already taking place, the idea that investigations are going to move forward with or without pardons. We see it happening right now as we speak with the investigations into Hunter Biden. Republicans right now, they are signaling that they will continue their investigations into Hunter Biden and everybody else connected to him regardless of the pardons. And this is going to be important because if Hunter gets called in to testify and maybe he won't show up, I don't know, which he's done before, he can possibly not be able to plead the fifth, meaning he could be forced to make testimony. Daily Wire said this, Senate Minority Whip John Thune, a Republican, who was elected in November to serve as the next Senate Majority Leader when the new Congress is sworn in next month, signaled on Monday that Congress will continue investigating corruption involving, he says, the Biden family after President Joe Biden pardoned his son this week. And he said, quote, President Biden repeatedly lied to the American people, Thune said in a statement exclusively to the Daily Wire, and continued, quote, his full and unconditional pardon for his son, which covers time when President Biden was a private citizen, raises further questions about the extent of Hunter Biden's crimes, they allege. And continues stating, this pardon and the repeated lies the president and his administration told about it will be a shameful bookend to President Biden's tenure in office. And I would be supportive of Congress continuing to look into allegations of corrupt behavior. Now, again, he's not promising it's going to happen, but he is saying that he would support investigations as they move forward, and he will be in a position to carry out those investigations. If the Trump administration makes good on its promises throughout the entire campaign that they will carry out broad investigations into basically every wrongdoing and every form of alleged corruption taking place in this country, this could be a pretty sweeping investigation that could include a whole lot of people. And I guarantee you, not all of them are going to get pardons. Maybe the people at the top, but that's going to paint a bad image for everybody else. because they're going to move forward with investigations with or without that. Now, look, in other news, New York City Mayor Eric Adams is now suggesting that sanctuary statuses, in New York at least, may soon come to a close. No more sanctuary in New York for illegal immigrants, he's saying. And he's also now saying that when President-elect Donald Trump comes to office, New York City may actually begin working with the Trump administration on carrying out mass deportations of illegal immigrants, in particular, criminal aliens. Watch this.
I want you to all go back and Google Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Google what they said about those who commit crimes in our city and what they said in our country. They said those who commit crimes need to get out right away. That was their position. So this is not a new position, because in the state of in the era of cancel culture, no one's afraid to be honest about the truth. Well, cancel me, because I'm going to protect the people of this city. And if you come into this country, in this city, and think you're going to harm innocent New Yorkers and innocent migrants and asylum seekers, this is not the mayor you want to be in the city under.
Now, when Mayor Eric Adams in New York was criticized for this or questioned about it, he actually raised an important point. He said, go back in history, go back in time, go back to the Obama administration, go back to the Clinton administration, go back and read the statements 10 years ago, 12 years ago, from many people of his own party. He's a Democrat. He said if you read their statements, if you look at the Obama policies on mass illegal immigration, Democrats used to be very much against illegal immigration. Barack Obama was labeled the deporter-in-chief because he deported so many people. Bill Clinton, again, was very tough on illegal immigration. Many of them made very strong statements, not just against illegal immigration, and you need to get in line and not skip the line, but also against criminal aliens who were coming to the United States and violating our laws. The point he was making is that although this is now being painted as a very partisan issue, it used to not be a partisan issue. This was something Democrats were historically very strong on, but recently have shifted on. And, you take what you want in terms of why that is. But Mayor Eric Adams is suggesting that just because he supports deportations of illegal immigrants, it does not mean that he's no longer a Democrat. That's what he's suggesting. Now, Mayor Eric Adams has over time become a critic of mass migration policies. Although New York City is one of the main areas where we are getting a lot of illegal immigrants, much of that has to do with some of the local laws. Laws, for example, that require the city to house people if they come here, including illegal aliens, meaning, of course, that city budget has to be diverted to feed and house every person who comes by bus and shows up asking for it. And that's tens of thousands of people, more than that actually. Even just in terms of criminal aliens, there's about that many. But he's also making the point that even the sanctuary city policies are things relatively beyond his control. But as mayor, he can cooperate with the Trump administration to allow them to come in and do their jobs. Now, he's even attempted notably to overturn some of these laws, and he's faced a lot of challenges with that. He alleges that the criminal charges he is currently facing, again, Mayor Eric Adams, mainly tied to alleged foreign influence. This is possibly, he says, a result of his challenges to the mass migration policies. He alleges that he's being politically targeted. On the other side, with the Justice Department, they say that, hey, no, we have a legitimate case. Again, take which side you want, right? But look, not all sanctuary cities are changing their tunes either. In some areas, it's actually the local citizens, not the local officials, who are getting restless over the issue. Take Detroit, for example. In Detroit, Fox News says, residents in Chicago are blasting Mayor Brandon Johnson over the city spending more than $500 million on sheltering migrants, with one telling the Democrat to his face during a city council meeting that he is the worst mayor in America. The criticism surrounding Johnson and Chicago's new arrival's mission, which so far has cost the city $574.5 million since its inception in August 2022, comes as the mayor is trying to overcome a $1 billion budget shortfall by the end of the year. They're spending money they don't have, in other words. They don't have enough money, and they're still spending money to house and feed and take care of illegal immigrants. People in these communities are saying, well, what about us? Remember, one of the big narratives in the United States is, underserved communities. Underserved communities. There are American citizens who grow up in areas where they don't have opportunity. American citizens where kids grow up and they have very dangerous, very bad schools. American citizens who say we can barely afford to live. And if you take these neighborhoods and the cities that deal with those types of problems and you spend more than $500 million right in front of their faces, giving other people who are not even American citizens all the benefits that the people of those communities have been begging for, what do you think is going to happen? Well, Detroit is now seeing what happens. It notes here the city council held a meeting Monday during which residents voiced their opposition to an approximately $60 million property tax increase floated as one way to help close the gap. They're saying, why are you making our lives more difficult while you're giving $500 million to people violating the country's laws? What about the citizens of this country? What about the residents of this state? That's the argument. Now look, with votes in some parts of the United States also still being counted, on another note, it's a month after Election Day, votes are still coming in some areas, and guess what? As votes come in, well, some House seats are flipping. Democrats have flipped another House seat, and this is narrowing the Republican majority. NBC News says this. They say Republicans will have a narrow majority in the House next year, with Democrats flipping one final seat in California, which a month into the election, after the election, is still counting votes in some areas. And it says this is leaving GOP leaders, Republicans, with even less margin for error as they try to advance President-elect Donald Trump's agenda. And as a Democrat, Adam Gray has defeated GOP Representative John Duarte in a rematch in California's 13th district in the Central Valley following weeks of ballot counting. NBC News projects, meaning Republicans won 220 House seats in the 2024 elections to Democrats' 215. The GOP, the Republicans, it says, can lose just 2 votes on legislation in the House in the next Congress if Democrats all vote in opposition, meaning Republicans will pretty much all have to vote in opposition or in support as well if they want to get anything done on Trump's side. This says this is giving them little wiggle room for absences, internal fighting, and vacancies. Someone can't show up one day, they have an emergency vote, they pass something in the House. That's the concern. Although Republicans also have the Senate, so even then it's hard for them to move anything. Democrats, in other words, controlling, again, Republicans have a supermajority right now. But Democrats, the most they can do is block things. The most they can do is block Trump's agenda with their very narrow, falling behind in the House. Meaning that anything Trump does will have to have basically absolute support among his party. Now notes here, though, that Duarte told the Turlock Journal that he had called Gray to concede on Tuesday evening, suggesting again this is all coming to an end. Now, with the elections and the votes still being counted, there are many allegations as well of votes being lost, for example. Notably enough votes being lost in some areas that is within the margin of error. And because of that, there's talk about, well, should they have investigations into possible fraud, investigations into possibly where those votes went? Should they have a recount, a re-election? Very likely, even though you do see some areas flipping, this is not going to be the end of it because you very likely will see investigations. The Trump administration, Trump again on the campaign trail for the last 4 or 5 years, has been talking about investigating issues with the election system. If he does carry that out, we could see investigations into some of these local elections where vote counting is still taking place. And again, where because of the vote counting, we're seeing seats flip. We'll see what happens. I think Americans do want answers on whether anything weird is happening or whether this is totally legitimate, right? But in other news, Amazon is doing something interesting. Amazon is suggesting some neighborhoods are too dangerous to deliver to, and Amazon is now being sued for that. In Washington, D.C. in particular, Amazon is facing lawsuits because it refuses to deliver packages to 2 zip codes, allegedly because of high crime in those 2 areas. CNBC said this. They note that Washington, D.C.'s Attorney General sued Amazon on Wednesday, accusing the company of covertly depriving residents in certain zip codes of the nation's capital from access to Prime's high-speed delivery. It says the lawsuit from AG, again Attorney General Brian Schwab, alleges that since 2022, Amazon has, quote, secretly excluded 2, quote, historically underserved DC zip codes from its expedited delivery service while charging Prime members living there the full subscription price. That'll probably be the technicality here, that these individuals are paying for a service they're not receiving. In terms of the lawsuit, that's very likely going to be one of the main points. Now, it notes that Amazon's Prime membership program costs $139 a year and includes perks like 2-day shipping, for free usually, and access to streaming content, Amazon Prime. It notes that Amazon spokesperson Kelly Nantel said in a statement, it's categorically false that its business practices are discriminatory or deceptive. Again, they're alleging that it's discrimination to not go to these areas with high crime, right? That's the allegation. And they said, quote, we want to be able to deliver as fast as we possibly can to every zip code across the country. However, at the same time, we must put the safety of delivery drivers first, Nantel said in a statement. And added, quote, in the zip codes in question, there have been specific and targeted acts against drivers delivering Amazon packages. We made the deliberate choice to adjust our operations, including delivery routes and times, for the sole reason of protecting the safety of our drivers. Now, I should note, they're alleging, of course, that this has to do with the safety of drivers. Very likely, this also ties into one of the bigger problems right now of theft of packages, which is becoming a big problem across the United States. They call them porch pirates. They drop off the package on your porch. Someone walking by, or sometimes working as gangs, go and look for packages on porches and steal them. Now, with the packages, I've actually experienced this in New York personally. Some zip codes, it's very hard to get an Amazon delivery. When I lived in Jackson Heights in Queens, I could not have packages delivered to my apartment. Every time I had a package delivered to my apartment in Jackson Heights in Queens, it was stolen. Every single time. I could not get packages because crime was such a big issue. I almost never had a single package delivered to my house that I received when I was living in Jackson Heights in Queens. Again, because of theft. It's a very big problem in some parts of the U.S. Now, you might say, well, what are you going to do? Have it delivered to a P.O. box or something? Or, you know, Amazon, for example, if you go, for example, to Whole Foods, sometimes they'll have Amazon delivery stations where they can deliver your packages and you can go pick it up. For areas facing high crime or what they call porch pirates, you can go there and get your package. I can actually tell you in New York City, I've actually walked by areas where there were what looked like gangs or homeless people, I don't know which, with a collection of Amazon boxes just sitting on the curb. There's a very large crime ring in different areas of the U.S. that just focuses on stealing these things. And of course, because of some of the light on crime laws, these people typically don't face any kind of charges. Again, in New York, it's done in the open. I've seen it in Manhattan. I've walked by it personally. The challenge for Amazon, though, is this. Aside from the safety of drivers, which they will be liable for, if a driver says, I don't believe I can go here safely, I'm worried about my safety, what's going to happen? Well, if something happens to them, who's going to be liable for that? The company that sent them there. That's going to be part of the technicality. And Amazon also tends to be liable for stolen packages. This may not be something broadly known, but if a package is stolen, anybody who buys on Amazon can file for redelivery of the same product. And if Amazon refuses, they can even contest the payment through their credit card company. And oftentimes, The litigation for that is handled by the credit card company, and Amazon will typically offset that to the seller so that they don't have to bear the burden for it. But somebody has to pay. For the person buying, there's not a lot of risk other than delay of receiving a delivery. But for the company and for the sellers, this is actually a huge cost, actually for the banks as well. To the extent that, again, this is a type of fraud that exists in our country that is facing some real problems. Now, mail theft used to be a felony. The issue is companies that work on mass deliveries like Amazon tend to have their own delivery services. And so the question is, well, is mail from Amazon protected under the same laws that, for example, the post office would receive? This will very likely turn into a broader issue because for Amazon, it's not just about the zip code. For Amazon, this is a broader problem they're facing. Now, again, in terms of liability to companies, in terms of liability for the safety of drivers, this is going to be complicated. But for Washington, D.C. and these zip codes, the other argument is if you offer a service and you charge people money for the service and they pay for a service, but you don't provide that service, again, free 2-day delivery in this case, the allegation is, well, you may be defrauding customers because you're not providing them with a service you're saying that they are getting when they pay for it. This will be probably something that goes to higher court. I personally doubt this is going to end in Washington because, again, of the seriousness and broadness of the issue. Now, look, in other news, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, is going to be in place with the incoming Trump inauguration on January 20th. But the new department, the DOGE department, will not just be operating with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. This is going to be something bigger. The House of Representatives in Congress, right? They are now moving to create a DOGE caucus, Department of Government Efficiency, with bipartisan support. Republicans and Democrats all working together to try to trim the fat. And now Democratic Representative Jared Moskowitz of Florida became the first Democrat to join the bipartisan House DOGE caucus on Tuesday. And here's what he said on CNN about this. Watch.
This is the caucus within Congress. Most caucuses in Congress are bipartisan, and most caucuses don't take caucus positions. They don't have official things to do, but members gather and have conversations. And so, look, I think it's the time for staying in safe spaces is over. We should be able to go in spaces and have that conversation. I joined with a specific focus because I've been working on for years trying to get FEMA out of the Department of Homeland Security. I'm sure there's going to be things that Elon and Vivek are going to come up with that I'm vehemently going to disagree on, and I will make sure that I'm allowed voice voting against that stuff. But we got to go to where the conversations are happening.
Now, look, what exactly DOGE is going to have to change, we'll have to see. We don't really know where it's going to go. We've never seen anything like it, frankly, and so we will have to wait and see. Trump and Vivek are not just talking about getting rid of overspending and government fat and maybe even entire government departments. They're also talking about getting rid of things like daylight savings time. We can finally be done with changing our clocks twice a year. Look, in other news, though, the CEO of a major health insurance company was shot and killed in New York City in what looks like it is being framed as a possible assassination. I'll be talking more about this after I come back from a quick break. We'll be back in less than 60 seconds, so don't go anywhere.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. The CEO of a major health insurance company was recently killed in New York City. He was shot and killed in what looks like and is being framed as a possible assassination. Now look, Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare's insurance unit, was shot and killed by a masked gunman in what appears to be a targeted attack in New York City, according to the NYPD. Daily Mail said this: the CEO of America's largest health insurance company was shot and killed by a masked attacker outside Manhattan's Hilton Hotel on Wednesday morning. United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, 50, was gunned down around 6:45 a.m. in Midtown, hours before New Yorkers gather in the neighborhood for the annual Christmas tree lighting at Rockefeller Center. And as Thompson was fatally shot in the chest and leg in a targeted attack, with the killer then fleeing down 6th Avenue on a bicycle. The NYPD has launched a huge manhunt to catch the suspect, who is believed to have escaped into Central Park. Witnesses said the suspected gunman was seen waiting outside the hotel before the shooting and knew which door Thompson was going to emerge from before shooting him at point-blank range. Now, a video of the man shows what looks like a handgun with an attached suppressor shooting the CEO from behind. There is a video of it. I don't want to show it. I don't think it's in good taste to show this, especially when the guy had kids. If something like this happened to me, I wouldn't want my kid to see it. You know what I mean? But I can summarize it for you. The killer, this individual, 6:45 in the morning, meaning this was a daylight shooting, not some late night robbery, right? Waiting in this area, suggesting it was premeditated, knowing which door the individual was going to be emerging from, suggesting this was, again, premeditated and with reconnaissance. He has, again, he's covered up. He has a pistol. There's obviously a suppressor attached to it. Those don't totally silence your gun, but it does get rid of some of the sound. The killer wears gloves. He keeps his face covered. The individual looks like he knows what he's doing and is prepared to kill this individual. It does not appear this was a robbery. The individual makes no attempt to rob the CEO. He shoots him from behind, and then he flees the scene immediately after the killing. This is, again, because of these odd facts being framed as a possible hit job, either someone disgruntled or something else. We don't yet know. But there is a manhunt underway. The individual decided to stop at Starbucks, and there is images now of the top half of his face. But beyond that, we don't know much about this. We'll keep you updated as it goes forward. Now look, in other news, the Chinese Communist Party is accelerating a trade war with the United States. It's not just the U.S., again, having a trade war with China anymore. The CCP is ironically accelerating the decoupling of its country from basically the free world. Daily Caller said this. They said that China announced Tuesday that it is banning exports to the United States of some metals and rare minerals which can be used in the production of semiconductors and ammunition. We need it for our bullets, folks. They're restricting our supply of ammunition. That's serious for America. They note that China's Ministry of Commerce announced that it is banning export of dual-use items related to germanium, gallium, antimony, and super hard materials to the U.S. in retaliation against the U.S. government's latest trade restrictions. Now, the irony of this will impact the United States for a bit. When it comes to the military, going back to the Obama administration, they were getting rid of what they call supply chain threats. They understood when China, the Chinese Communist Party, restricted the supply of rare earth minerals to Japan, when they again had the disputes over the East China Sea, and notably over the Senkaku Islands, which are Japanese territory. The CCP claims ownership over them. As a weapon during that time to manage what was turning into a military crisis, the Chinese Communist Party began restricting the supply of rare earth minerals, which crippled the Japanese high-tech industry. When that happened, that was a shot over the bow to every country in the world to begin looking at what products do we need that are reliant on CCP minerals or materials. And that began reports from the Pentagon and analysis from the Pentagon going all the way through the Obama administration into the first Trump administration, all the way through the Biden administration into now, where we are right now. Now, the important part is this. For basically core needs, the needs of the military. They have alleged they've been able to secure alternative sources to the extent that we don't need China. For the broader market and for mass supply, we still do depend on them quite a bit. But because of this, in recent months, there has been talk notably of establishing rare earth mining operations. Interestingly, Australia is looking to manage a lot of those operations in various countries, including in the Middle East, actually, and including in parts of Latin America. Australia actually is one of the bigger mining countries on Earth. A lot of their economy is on mining, especially that copper. And so Australia, being one of the major global mining powers, is going to be looking to create alternative sources of all the stuff the CCP is producing. Meaning, the CCP doing this will actually hurt us for a bit, but in the long run, the Chinese Communist Party is going to hurt a lot more from this. The United States, because of this, right, they've been working to secure alternative sources of the minerals, and this ban will accelerate those programs. It'll make them do it faster. And it will also work to solidify the breaking away of the United States and notably every country in the free world from the Chinese Communist Party. Because what's happening, even outside of the trade wars, even outside of the brewing global, actual physical wars we're seeing, the CCP is becoming less reliant for key goods. Even on the business front, businesses are saying it is becoming too risky to do business in China. And because they want to, quote unquote, de-risk, they're pulling their businesses out, meaning a decoupling right now is taking place. The very decoupling the CCP says is trying to avoid, it is ironically accelerating by doing this. Now, folks, that said, hit the like button, leave a comment in the chat, and let's jump into some questions. So again, if you have questions, comments, leave them in the chat. We'll jump into it now. All right, first off, Martin McKenzie, you're saying, how can a pardon be given for a crime that has not been committed yet? That reminds me of medieval popes granting indulgences to persons who wanted to commit a sin. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Okay, so you're talking, of course, about the idea of broad pardons. And the Democrats right now, not all of them, actually the majority of Democrats do not want this, at least in Congress. But there are some right now suggesting that Biden, before he leaves office, should offer sweeping pardons to every person who Donald Trump and his incoming administration are suggesting they could investigate. When Trump is saying that, he's saying he's your retribution, right? And he's saying he's going to be carrying out investigations of any possible crimes or wrongdoings. There are some individuals suggesting that Biden should take that list of names and individuals and offer the same kind of pardons to all of those individuals that he granted to his son, Hunter Biden. Now, the pardon that was given to Hunter Biden is not something that has ever taken place before. Because, again, Hunter Biden faced charges on tax crimes and gun charges. That was one thing. Biden did not just pardon Hunter Biden on the tax and gun charges. He pardoned him on any possible crimes, going back more than a decade, notably to 2014 when Biden got a position with Burisma in Ukraine, meaning that, again, that would be part of the investigations Congress wants to carry out into any alleged crimes or bribery or tit for tat, or whatever you want to call it, right, that may have taken place through those business arrangements. This gives Hunter Biden protection from any possible charges. And we've never really seen pardons done like this for possible crimes rather than known crimes, right? That's the issue. Now, the only case that has ever been seen like this was when Richard Nixon was given a pardon for a very broad time frame because he was also facing criminal investigations. Again, former President Richard Nixon, who stepped down from office because of the Watergate scandal. Other than Nixon, we've never seen a pardon like the one Hunter Biden just received. But they're saying that Joe Biden could offer a similar pardon to everybody who will face possible charges. On the point of that, it could actually do more harm than good, as I've been mentioning, because it makes you look bad, right? If you grant pardons, it makes you look guilty frankly. And typically, when you grant pardons, as Martin McKenzie is noting, typically when you make pardons, it's because you committed a crime and you're being pardoned for the crime. That's the very nature of a pardon. You did it, you were guilty, we're pardoning you. You're forgiven for your sins, go free, right? But a preemptive type is not normal. The preemptive type is the thing that's unprecedented right now. And it's a funny note that it's kind of like the medieval popes giving like your orgy pass or something like that. Hey, preemptive sin, you know? Not forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. Instead, forgive me, Father, for I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? That's a very different kind of pardon. Forgive me, Father, for tonight I'm going to sin a lot. You know, that was the allegation. And you could basically buy a get out of hell free card, basically, from the Pope. You know, which was, of course, one of the big accusations with Martin Luther when he, you know, nailed his criticisms of these things to the church doors, right? That was one of the big criticisms of the time, which led to a lot of the reformations. You know, again, going back to history. It is to see that kind of, forgive me, Mr. President, for I will sin, you know, or I may possibly have sinned, but forgive me for everything I might have done that you might possibly find. It's a very different kind of pardon. It's not your normal pardon. All right, Paul Nuvante, you're saying, sleight of hand works when peeps have short memories. Yeah, actually, this is an important point, too, when it comes to Internet archives, because, you know, the Internet has a short memory, and the media tends to gaslight people. It's really bizarre, the types of censorship we've been watching, you know, over the past several years, because what you see a lot of the big corporate media do is this. They'll lie to you, and then when you say, that's not what happened, they'll say, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is what happened. And then you go and try to research the history of what happened, and you find the history has been erased from the internet. It's bizarre, right? Because unfortunately these days, a lot of news is online. A lot of the records of news are online. Now, it used to work like this, that even if history was erased, there are archive websites. Those of you who watched Crossroads for a long time know that I very frequently use archive websites to show you deleted web pages, deleted news articles, altered websites of organizations, and I show you very often how they changed the story. Everybody who's watched Crossroads for a long time knows that I frequently do this. Something very big happened recently. A lot of those archive websites, they suddenly deleted an entire breadth of time. They just erased history. A lot of them now are no longer functional. And this has to do with some lawsuits of different organizations tied in ironically with the censorship establishment that have moved now and actually succeeded to erase a lot of internet history. They have now erased history. Now, that's a big deal because, as Paul Nuvante notes, sleight of hand works when peeps have a short memory. Peeps is in people, right? And then, of course, the way that you clarify history is by showing the records of history. If the records of history are then destroyed, well, that leaves the door open where you can begin to question your own knowledge. They can gaslight you. You can be like, well, no, that's not what happened. I remember what happened. I was there. And then the media tells you, no, you're falsely remembering. You're obviously an insane conspiracy theorist. You should seek help, my friend. You know, they're gaslighting you, right? In the truest sense of what gaslighting means. They're gaslighting you. No, you're crazy. You're crazy if you believe you remember this, because look at our website where, you know, they've altered the articles. Look at our website. This is what happened. You're obviously an insane conspiracy theorist. They gaslight the public. And then people who do have short memories say, you know, deplatform the conspiracy theorist for claiming something happened that didn't happen. This is unfortunately one of the ways the internet has come to work. And with the recent erasure of a large, you know, several years of news, the ability now to show what actually did take place is very difficult. Now you could say, well, you can search it online because, Epoch Times, we're not deleting our history. You can still read our articles. Crossroads, I'm not deleting my history. You can go read our articles. And so you can still find records of history on independent websites. But the problem is if you try to search us on Google, they'll downrank us. You might not even find our articles on Google. If you do a search for a news topic on Google, you're probably not going to see an Epoch Times article. You're probably not going to see me on there, you know what I mean? Because the way they mess with the algorithms, they downrank all the independent voices. And, instead of that, if you try to search us, they'll feed you disinformation about us. They'll put up like the hit pieces against us, most of which have all of which are fake. They all twist information in ways to make things sound true that aren't true. And this is the way that they discredit the independent voices, deplatform the independent voices, and try to erase the history of news by suppressing the records of history from the independent voices while they alter the history of the ones they allow to be shown. Again, people are being gaslit. They're gaslighting people. And that's real serious when you think about the broader social impacts. George Orwell, I know we talk about Orwell a lot, in 1984 talks about this, that he who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the past controls the future. And if you have the ability to change the records of the past and then gaslight people into believing that if they believe things used to be one way, but you now say it's something else, and you've changed the records to, again, erase what people remember took place, you can make them out to be crazy. And that's what they do. It's insane. I mean, this is crazy what we're watching. On that note, though, the incoming FCC chair, he's already been appointed by Trump. He's not an elected, he doesn't need to be approved by the Senate, but again, with the incoming Trump administration. The new Federal Communications Commission chair is saying that he's going to be dismantling this, that he's going to be going after the organizations that have been using algorithms and other things like this to alter history and censor people. And so this problem could soon be resolved, although we will see how they do it, whether it can be done, and how effective it actually is. Alfred's mom, you're saying, LA passed sanctuary laws, you're talking about sanctuary cities for illegal aliens, but they already have homeless all over the city. They can't cope with the homeless, and they want more illegals, LOL. California is an interesting place when it comes to some of the crazy laws there. They actually tried creating programs to create housing for all the homeless people. They try to build like tiny homes, but because of all the red tape on new construction and zoning laws and permits and investigations they have to do for environmental things, and if they find like an endangered cricket, you can't build there. Imagine you buy land to do construction, and then you have some environmental agency guy come in, he's like, nope, I found a frog, I found a cricket, sorry, this is now protected land. You can own it, you can keep owning it, but you can never build anything on it. Yeah, good choice, buddy. Enjoy your new property that you can't build anything on. California does that. In fact, I know even the police there, they faced a lot of problems with that because they were trying to build like new training facilities. They have these environmental, investigator guys come from the city, and they literally, I'm not exaggerating here, they'll claim they find like a plant or a bug, and because it's part of the ecosystem for that bug, that they can't build anything there. And so, new construction is very hard in California. If you were to ask me, it's part of a racket. I believe there's a racket involved with this because they don't want to have too much new construction, because if you build too much, it messes with the supply and demand of real estate, and it causes real estate markets to go down too much. And if you're a politician with a lot of real estate holdings, or if you're a bank and you've been buying foreclosed homes and everything like that, or because of the way that people refinance and can't pay it off and then lose their homes and the bank seizes it. Those assets count as money for the banks and money for the investment firms and money for the people who buy them and all the politicians and everybody else who buys properties. You don't want to devalue it. You want the value to go up. And if you understand what that means in practice, where housing is an asset, housing is regarded like you're investing in the stock market, and housing is part of the assets of a bank that, again, if you reduce the value of that asset, you harm the bank. They don't want the value to go down. If the value goes down, they lose on a very large scale if they've bought a lot of properties. And so they put red tape in place to prevent too much new construction. You can still build, but it's a very long, very difficult, and very expensive process. Now, the irony of that, all that red tape, is that when they try to build like housing for homeless people, they will literally go and like, hey, we designated $500 million. I'm just giving a random example. This is not an actual number. Hypothetically speaking, they'll give $500 million to build a bunch of housing for, homeless people. Okay, we need to house all the homeless. We've allocated the money. We're responsible. We need to take care of our own. They go to carry it out because of the red tape and all the regulations and investigations they have to do. It ends up costing like $1 million or even more than that to build like a one-bedroom tiny house, sometimes not even able to do much. And so they might allocate a ton of money and barely be able to create housing for a small number of people. And then when, as Alfred's mom is noting here in the chat, when you have illegal immigrants come in, and the illegal immigrants are coming literally by the tens of thousands, in some areas like 10,000 people a week. Like, think about that, right? You might have 10,000 homeless people, and that's a problem. The 10,000 homeless people, that's a lot of people. And then if you bring in 10,000 new illegal immigrants who are going to be homeless unless you give them housing, what do you do with them? We've become numb to these. We've become numb to these numbers. Imagine how many people 10,000 is. That's a lot of people. Imagine if a city had 10,000 homeless people. What would that city look like? If you have like 500 homeless people on every block, that's what that would look like, right? That's a lot of people. That's an insane amount of people. But when we say 10,000 illegal immigrants coming like every week, we don't even process what that looks like. What happens then when they have to house all these people? Well, obviously, it looks like what's happening in Chicago, where they have to spend $500 million to build housing for them and to pay for their food and everything else. Otherwise, they're going to be living on the streets. And if you're in an area where people, if they're on the streets, they're going to freeze to death, you can't let that happen. It's a humanitarian crisis at that point. And so, it is an issue. And the question goes back to the point that, that the residents in Chicago are raising of, well, look, the people of this country are not doing so well either. Yeah, great, the stock market's doing well, but what about the average person who can barely afford groceries? The average person who can't afford rent because of all the regulations on new housing that have squeezed the housing market to the point where we can't afford to live anymore. What about us, right? And so these people who are being squeezed from both sides of this, who are poor, or even the middle class are being squeezed by it with housing costs and food costs. And in a squeezed job market, ironically because of competition from jobs where illegal immigrants actually drive down wages and create more competition for jobs. Again, supply and demand, right? If there's 10 jobs, the job pays $15 an hour, but 1,000 people are applying, and so the job might even offer less money because so many people want it. They don't need to pay $15 an hour, $30 an hour, right? They'll pay the minimum of what they have to pay and based on what people will do to work. The competition for this drives everything down, and so mass illegal immigration has that effect on it. And so, when you're talking about the people in this country, I would say not even homeless. We talk about homeless a lot. What about the average person? The suffering, the hardships they're going through. while watching other people just get free handouts. That's a big issue for them. And I would actually argue, and I think this is probably why Trump made such a big deal, such a point, I would say, of campaigning so heavily on the issue of mass illegal immigration, is because it's not as partisan as a lot of the talking heads like to say it is. A lot of people in many of these communities who are not doing well and then see the money that they believe they should be getting going to people who are not citizens and who are violating the laws, they're saying, well, what's going on here? What are you doing? And so obviously, I think that does impact the way people vote. And I think we're watching the effects of that now. Yeah. Let's see, Science Chick 72, you're saying plenty of minerals all over USA, but it's not being mined, blocked for various reasons, especially federal government. Yeah. You're talking partly, I believe, about rare earth minerals, but probably not just rare earth minerals. America, we kind of have everything we need. America, geopolitically speaking, is a very unique place on the planet. It's a very valuable country. Now, this is not talked about often. America, militarily, is like a bastion. It's very hard to invade the United States if the country is united. Again, from the south, you have a narrow pass. From the north, it's very cold. We, of course, have very large oceans separating us from the rest of the world. We also notably have a lot of mountainous regions, deserts, infrastructure. If you wanted to invade America, you'd have a very hard time, even if we didn't have the strength that we have militarily. Even if the U.S. military was on par with every other military on earth, attacking America would be extremely difficult. And that's even aside from the point that Americans in our blood, we like to hoard food and ammunition, and we like to shoot guns a lot of us do. This was not even controversial when I was a kid. Your average American is better trained with a firearm, has higher quality firearms, and has better camouflage than most trained militaries. Your average hunter has more effective camouflage and better firearms than most militaries, and is probably a better shot because he has more experience. I'm just talking militarily here, not to mention logistics lines, not to mention infrastructure, not to mention everything else. I pity the fool who tries to invade old Appalachian one day. You know what I mean? But aside from that, even in terms of resources, America technically has everything it needs. Whether it's if we wanted to, which we've kind of handed it off, manufacturing, we have huge manufacturing capability. Steel, oil, and yes, rare earth minerals. We have it all. We don't need it from anywhere else if we wanted to do it domestically. We have it all. Now, even when it comes to oil, America is rich with oil, extremely rich with oil. There's also kind of a racket with the oil business, oil futures and things like this, where a lot of countries, they intentionally restrict the amount of oil they release onto the market because they don't want gas being too cheap. I would actually say that represents a type of antitrust violation. I think it could represent a type of racketeering, coordinating between companies and even countries to maintain a certain price. Other people would argue that oil is because of the petrodollar, it's so closely tied to international currency that if you were to release too much of it on the market, you'd actually disrupt the entire global financial system. But they can. It's not that there's a shortage of oil. Many countries that have large oil stores, they just don't release it onto the market. There's more than enough to go around, and there's enough to release onto the market and drive prices of gas into the 10-cent range if they wanted to. They're not doing it because they want to maintain a price. There's more to this stuff than meets the eye, right? But it's the same thing with a lot of the economy. It's the same thing with housing, as I was just discussing. It's the same thing with a lot of markets. You don't want to create oversupply, right? You actually, financially, you don't want to do that. Even in terms of international law, there's laws around that, like anti-dumping laws, as they call it. It's one of the accusations of China right now. Believe what you will on whether it's moral or immoral for them to withhold products in order to maintain prices. But that is part of the way the economies of the entire world work. You don't want to have too much supply because it damages the prices, right? These things aren't as These things are a little more complicated than many people may believe they are. Even in terms of the hardships a lot of Americans say they have. Hey, we can barely get by. I can barely afford rent. I can barely afford gas. I can barely afford groceries. The resources are there to change that. The ability to lower the costs of living are there. It's being done in a way to restrict supply, to prevent the prices from dropping. Some individuals, when it comes to markets, even calculate this. To what level can we squeeze people before they break? Right? I'm talking about the real nefarious side of economics. To what degree can we squeeze people before they break? And they will put prices up to the very limits of that. The technical term they would use for this is shock testing. Imagine, for example, you have a flight simulator and you want to see how much force an object can take. You're testing the wing of an airplane and you have this big flight chamber, right? And you're testing wind pressure. You want to find what the breaking point is. Once you find the breaking point, you set the price at the breaking point. Many organizations, many companies do that. You will charge people the maximum of what they are willing to pay before the system collapses on itself. And that becomes the price margin. The squeeze on the housing market, the squeeze in the way they set gas prices is all based on this concept, right? And it's not even just governments. It's like, businesses do this. Private businesses do this. It's the same thing with selling a product. If you want to make a car, you'll set the price based on what people are willing to pay and based on how you choose to go about the marketing and stuff to maximize profits. How do you maximize profits? You have to balance willingness to pay versus demand versus public need versus what they're capable of before they break and you destroy them, right? That's how prices are set. That's how prices are determined for products. That's the way the market works. And so back to the point of the United States, yeah, we have all the resources here. We have minerals, we have rare earth minerals, we have all the gas we could ever need. But there's kind of a game that's played, managing not just U.S. interests, but global interests. And when you talk about globalism, why is it that we signed NAFTA and we put a lot of Americans out of business and we did that to the benefit of Mexico and Canada? Why did we do that? Well, it's because of globalism, right? It's because there are politicians who are not looking at the interests of the American people. They're looking at globalist interests. Why is it that we, instead of, again, having our own gas and oil, wells and stuff operating full steam in the U.S., why is it that we buy from Saudi Arabia? Why is it that we allow Russia to control the uranium markets for nuclear reactors, to control, for example, a lot of the natural gas market, to control a lot of the oil market? Why do we let them do that when we have the resources to challenge them on it? The answer is globalism. Why is it that we allow countries to do these things and undercut us on business deals, including with a lot of the undercutting on business deals has to do with the fact that some countries put huge tariffs on us. We don't reciprocate tariffs. It has to do with the fact that, again, international trade agreements are signed that are to the detriment of American businesses, but for the benefit of foreign businesses. It's to the point that international regulation can fine and even badly damage American businesses, and no political repercussions take place that would prevent that type of abuse from taking place. Why do we allow this? Why? Because again, it would have to be on the government level these things are resolved, not the business level. The answer is globalism, right? It's because there are politicians acting in global interest rather than domestic interest. Now, when it comes to Trump and what he represents, and again, there's arguments for that. You don't want the whole world to be impoverished. You don't want the world to be living, in like the third world. You don't want to harm them. You don't want to send them all back to the Stone Age. You know what I mean, or maybe like medieval times at this rate. But then the cost of that is America, for example, is not like the shining, futuristic mega empire that it possibly could be. You know what I mean? That's the cost and benefit, cost and balance of it all, right? We support other countries and we let them take advantage of us in order to benefit them and kind of balance the global quality of life, right? That's the argument for it. But when it comes to Trump coming in now, and what he represents is that they're talking not about globalism, but instead populism. The idea that a leader of a country should represent the interests of the people of that country rather than considering the interests of every country on the face of the planet. Now, the argument for that is that these problems of, let's say, different countries maybe getting thrown back to medieval times, if they were to lose their monopolies on resources that are only given to them because one country refuses to engage in that market. For example, the restraint on American oil, which actually they've actually been, under Biden, they actually have been opening that up. It's not widely talked about, but they actually have been. They didn't at first, but they have since then. But why is it that we do that, right? The argument with populism is that if every country were to care about its own, then you actually have countries looking to fix their problems rather than relying on what is basically just glorified global welfare. You would have countries that produce things and sustain themselves because they're actually sustainable. You have markets that exist and policies that exist that are based on the actual status of what is sustainable within that country. That in reality, maybe a lot of the socialist policies you see in Europe and in Canada, like socialized medicine, would not be affordable if they were not trading with $100 billion deficit with to the United States. If we weren't shouldering $100 billion a year with these countries, for example, you know what I mean? They wouldn't have that $100 billion to go and spend on things that aren't sustainable. That's the argument. And they would probably also have to build domestic industries that take into account the fact that we're not going to baby them anymore, right? That's the argument with it. And if you look, frankly, what's happening in parts of Latin America, you can see that. Look at Javier Milei, for example, in Argentina. Look, for example, at some of the leaders that have come up in recent years that do represent the interests of their countries. You actually do see them creating domestic well-being. And if they can fix the problems domestically rather than relying on international support, it's the idea of teaching a man to fish rather than just giving him a fish. You break the systems of reliance so that self-reliance becomes a self-sustaining element. And then you have a whole world of adults rather than one adult trying to feed all the kids. You know what I mean? Yeah, you make the whole world kind of grow up a little bit. And if they want to have a better quality of life, they need to get off their butts and start working, right? A lot of people would say this, that when you talk about the idea of what it means to be a man or a woman or be an adult, I would define it as this. A child is in the process of development. A child is nourished and supported, of course, in the process of development. And a child needs to learn skills. The education of a child is to teach them how to be self-sustaining. When you become an adult, you are capable of sustaining yourself. That is the clear definition of it. I would actually say that on the point of society and so on, I don't believe in a purely selfish society either. I would actually say that when a boy becomes a man, and I'm not just saying an adult, and when a young girl becomes a woman, I would say what that actually means is something different, because you can have a man who doesn't help anybody. You can have a man who's purely selfish, but he would not be recognized as a good man. Women who try to date may know men like this, who they're very wealthy and they live very extravagant lifestyles, but they don't really care about anybody else, right? They don't really do anything with it. A good man, I would say, is somebody who not only cares for themselves, but also cares for others, right? And I'd say with a woman as well. And a lot of times that comes through parenthood. When you have a kid, you're forced out of selfishness and you have to care for another life. A man's labor then becomes not something purely self-serving, but instead something for the well-being of his family, right? I very much still believe in society. I believe in community. I believe in tradition, which supports that. And I think it's unfortunate that we confuse that with socialism, which is the seizing of assets rather than allowing people to do it of their own volition, right? The destruction of generosity through plunder, in other words, and the idea of creating a totalitarian kind of superstructure to manage the entire thing. I think it's absolutely destructive, and I think it creates a nation of babies, a big nation of babies that have been made and rendered incapable of self-efficiency and self-reliance. You destroy the self-efficiency of the individual because you want a bunch of little children who are easy to control, right? That's the other side of it. True strength and true nourishing of lives is to help people become self-sustaining. A good leader does not suppress the strength of those around him because he's afraid of being usurped. A good leader wants to make people around him strong so that they all become strong. That is a good leader. And I think that socially this is what we've been lacking. A tyrannical leader wants to suppress the strength and the independence of others because they're afraid of those people overcoming them. A strong leader wants to build strength and create self-efficiency. The raising of a child is for that purpose. You want to have children who do great things, right? You want to have them strong and self-reliant and able to go into the world and do great things. A good leader wants the same thing for the people of their nation. That's the difference between communism, which wants to suppress and keep people down, versus what I would say is tradition, which looks to strengthen and create self-efficiency. Personally, right? All right, folks, that said, I went a bit longer today, so let's call it an end for now. That said, join me tomorrow. Tomorrow, right? It's Thursday, not Friday. Join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I always enjoy talking with you all, so again, looking forward to it. I will see you then. In the meantime, please don't forget to share this video. Help us get the word out on Crossroads. Tell a friend or family about it, family member about it. And also, folks, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.